Hi, everybody. We're live ahead of qualifying for the Belgian Grand Prix and our final live show before the summer break. Rob and I are doing this an extra 15 minutes early because we have a lot to unpack today, Rob, including a big shoey for you.
Adam, yep, another hour and a bit before the deadline. Looking forward to get through all of the latest news on F1 Fantasy, and of course the boot and the Bud Light in the background for everyone that's familiar with the wager regarding Australians on the podium, or in Oscar's case last week, winning the race.
So just some ground rules as we get ready for the show today. There are a lot of things we can do in the Fan Amp base for the fantasy formula. One is answering our contest question, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. Will Max Verstappen win this race today, which he has done after taking an engine penalty each of the last 2 years? So let us know. And at the end of this hour, we'll pick one lucky winner to get a prize from our sponsor, Fifth Gear Garms. Second thing is, if you're having trouble with your team, I know Rob and I are, feel free to take a picture of it and drop it in our base, and we'll be sure to analyze it live as part of the show today. And then lastly, vote on which vessel Rob will be doing that shoey out of. And we have 3 great choices for you in our base. So at the bottom of the hour, we'll be sure to pick one of those, and Rob will lock in his team first and then take the shoey second.
Yeah, can't wait, Adam. It's, I think, the second one we've had on stream since we started doing this. So yeah, it's going to be a fun one. Should we jump straight into free practice times from yesterday and this morning?
Let's do it.
I think we'll just wait until they come up on screen here. But I think the biggest takeaway for me was, up until a rain interrupted FP3, Max definitely showed us, his full potential in the Red Bull. There was obviously a lot of talk around that grid penalty he's serving this weekend, and we got off to a good start yesterday afternoon. So I think he's probably, if it wasn't for starting 10 places back, he's probably one of the picks of the bunch for a podium finish, but probably not the case, having to make his way through the field.
It was a really impressive start from Max, and a reminder of why we can't discount him at this track. And this is really the reason why so many strategists are looking at him as an anchor to their lineup this week. In each of the last 2 seasons, not only did he win this race, but he set season highs in fantasy scoring, and doing so because he had so many overtakes. So he's showing some of that potential for blistering speed this weekend.
Yeah, I definitely think as well, as you say, got a great history here, and the Red Bull seems to look a little bit more at ease than it probably has done the last couple of weekends. So I think if you've got Max in your team this weekend, there's definitely a reason to be optimistic.
Absolutely. I liked the P3 finish for Alex Albon too. A lot of folks are considering bringing him in as one of the lower end tier C assets because he tends to be fast in these fast circuits. And Alex gave us a little reminder of that in FP1.
Yeah, definitely. He was one of the surprise movers for me. Mercedes, probably, they were to be expected, I think, around that mark. No real surprises inside the top 10 if we're just going down the list here. So Esteban Ocon, the only real driver not really to get off the mark in that free practice one. But moving forward to FP2, McLaren, I think, very much affirmed to us that they are must-own assets this week.
Yeah, further proof that they can do anything, anywhere. So McLaren is as safe as they've ever been. And then as we look ahead to FP2, this is around the time that Mercedes got this notice that maybe those upgrades you brought this week weren't that great, because we heard this morning that they've backed out just about everything that they brought on Friday. You can see both George and Lewis dropping a little bit in the FP2 table, and then that opens up the door for a 1-2 for McLaren.
Yep. I don't know where FP3, there it is, went. It was there a second ago, but it was pretty rain interrupted this morning, our time, early afternoon in Europe and the UK. I just don't think we got any information that's valuable this week. So I'd probably go off yesterday's practice sessions and the F1 Fantasy Tool Sims to guide your decision making.
Yeah, and this is just a little bit of a reminder this morning that the 2 McLarens, Max Verstappen, they're very good in the rain, so I expect them to do well in qualifying. A quick reminder that Bottas is really good in the rain, and Stroll gave you this much hope that he's good in the rain, and then he bent it and red flagged most of the rest of the session. So we'll see if Aston Martin can recover Stroll's car in time to put in a lap for qualifying today. Everyone else that looked good in this session, I think, will look good today as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest takeaway for me was how optimistic, if we maybe just pivot over to F1 Fantasy Tools, because there's probably going to be a bit of discussion around that. And Kev just called that out in the Rotor Sims in F1 Fantasy Tools. I think Red Bull and McLaren are probably right where we expected them to be, or sorry, Max and McLaren are right where we expected them to be. I think the biggest surprise for me was Ferrari, particularly after how mediocre they've looked the last few weeks. And Mercedes, they're not drastically off the pace. They're a couple points, each of the drivers behind Sainz and Leclerc, but I was surprised to see such a delta when we go down to the constructors specifically. And a lot of people have asked, should we go for Ferrari over Mercedes this week?
There are two things that really stand out to me as I look at the rider sims. The first one is the heavy lean into Red Bull. So you're assuming a big bounce back for Sergio Perez. A two-stop strategy gives Red Bull more opportunities for the fastest pit stop, and then a lot of faith in Verstappen with the overtakes. And the other one, like you said, Rob, was Ferrari over Mercedes. And I think that's contributing to a few things. One is that it was a bit warmer yesterday, which Ferrari will do better in those conditions than Mercedes, but it's cooling off today and into tomorrow. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, Mercedes has undone a lot of the upgrades that they brought in for FP1, FP2 that a lot of these sims were based off of. So it'll be interesting to see if this is truly the running order or if Mercedes reverting back to the Hungary spec will get them back into the top three.
Yeah, it's a tricky circuit, isn't it? Because I found as though it's such a different car setup compared to, the likes of Budapest, the likes of even Monaco, where we have had kind of different outcomes. Ferrari, as we remember, did very well in Monaco, and then Mercedes, had a semi-decent outing last weekend. And, Spa is a bit of a weird one because it's so fast through sector 1. Then with those kind of medium speed corners through sector 2, you're kind of going for a middle of the road setup. And Terry's obviously coming on later to maybe give us a rundown of the track characteristics, but you're probably losing time in one sector and making it up in the others if kind of your car setup is going one direction or the other. So maybe it's just one of those situations where Mercedes can recover the deficit in some of those slower speed corners.
And since they had so much dead air during FP3, they were talking about the challenge of getting things quite right this weekend is how do you balance the weather changes between qualifying and the Grand Prix? It's supposed to be wet like we saw in FP3 in the next hour for qualifying. So you might want to have more downforce, try to get a little bit more traction in those wet conditions and qualify high, but that you're setting yourself up for a bit of a disaster tomorrow where it's expected to be dry. Rob, what else do you know about the weather and how can we start preparing for it?
Yeah, I mean, why don't we take a look at the forecast now that you've mentioned it, Adam? I've just got AccuWeather up here for Spa. It's highly likely there's going to be rain in qualifying. So I do think what I can tell you is probably stating the obvious is that we're going to see surprises in qualifying that we probably don't expect. We might see a Q1 exit from a top driver. We might see one of the back markers make it into Q3. So I would tread with some caution, but at the same time, you can't really predict some of these outcomes. So that's kind of the reason why I'm leaning in the direction of going with a team I more or less have from last week, because if I'm taking hits for drivers that ultimately have a disastrous qualifying, for example, that I'm expecting a good result from, it's going to completely upend my plans. So I think we're going to see a change in the running orders. Kind of what's your point of view on that?
The big thing for me is a lesson learned from last week. I made this joke on our preview show this week that during our live show for Hungary, I became aware that it was getting wet on track after I had locked in Red Bull as my constructor. My first thought was that Perez was going to bin it, and then he did. I think I can't possibly do that to myself again 2 weeks in a row and have any piece of Perez. So to me, the Red Bull constructor is out because I just don't trust Perez in qualifying, or that he and Red Bull will get both a wet and dry strategy right for him to maximize the opportunity. So Red Bull, to me, is totally anchored to Max and the fastest pit stop points.
Yeah, definitely. I think, to your point, Max will score well. I think he's probably the number one Red Bull asset compared to the constructor, and Perez I wouldn't even touch with a 10-foot pole. So I think you can make a case for Red Bull, but I think with the consistency McLaren offers, I'd rather two drivers up the front than have to rely on two to make overpasses further back in the field.
Agreed. And this is a good point to go back to, that this is a pretty high overtake circuit. We're heading after the break into Zandvoort, which is typically a low overtake circuit. So how do you get this balance of midfield drivers that could get the overtakes and gain value this week, but then going into a more a two premium driver set for Zandvoort if you're not there already, to make sure that you're capturing the cost cap gain and the points for both of those races?
Yeah, definitely. There's been a couple questions from Sponge and Tyler just around certain drivers and constructors and kind of where we rate them on fantasy tools, which I'd like to answer. My approach, and Adam, you might have a different point of view, so would definitely welcome your perspective here. But I guess my thought process around assets that are probably off meta at the moment, like Ferrari, like Red Bull Constructor, like Max Verstappen, is that for many people that don't have 3 trades, you're probably having to move them out again in Zandvoort for a -10 if the 2 premium driver lineup at a low overtake track becomes the better option of the 2. So that's why I don't know if I like Ferrari quite as much, because they haven't yet proven to us that they are top stuff. And then I think for Max, if you've got 3 trades or you're willing to take a -10 and hold him for a couple of weeks to pay that off, then I think that's perfectly fine. But that's why I don't think I'll be getting in Max, because I'm getting a -10 to get him in this week, and then I'd likely have to take another -10 to move him out in the Netherlands. So that's a -20 right there. And when I look at the sims, my McLaren Mercedes teams are a 205 estimate, and the Max Red Bull teams are 225. So I'm like, the net effect of that is 0 over 2 weeks when I plan a bit ahead.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And this is a theme that's going to carry through a lot of our lineup critiques, is thinking ahead to the next race. How many transfers do you have? And are you going totally upside down for a team like you're showing on the screen here from Fantasy Tools, and then potentially going all the way back into a McLaren and Mercedes build for Zandvoort? That would probably be 3-4 transfers. And is it worth it for what could be 20 or 30 points this week?
Yeah, exactly. Look, it could pay off. I'm not discounting anyone that wants to go down that route, but this is just for my team, and I've made trades in the past that have been -10s, and over 2 weeks they just haven't paid off, and I don't want to get to a point where I'm having to wildcard in and out of bad lineups, because it's not really a way I want to use my chip this year.
And so Sponge and Tyler have been asking, do you agree with the prediction of Ferrari over Mercedes? I would say it's close, but probably not enough. And I think, and I don't have all the details from Ryder yet, I would imagine he's taking the data from FP1 and FP2 when Mercedes was running a very different car. And now that things are cooler and they're running a different car, that's enough to get them back into the fight for me. Plus, I'm trying to cover off all these other F1 fantasy content creators like yourself and Tom and Ewan and others that are probably not going to Ferrari. So I don't want to be on an island with something that I'm not super confident in.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Is there anything else you want to cover off before we jump into the lineups? Maybe the sims, or have we already kind of aced that? I feel like
there was a question in the chat about Yuki, Hulk or Yuki, from Jonathan. And just a reminder for anyone who doesn't know Yuki's situation, he is starting at the back of the grid with a 60-place grid penalty. No, he's not starting back at Silverstone. He is going to start at the back of the grid. He's replaced just about everything. And so I think in a pretty fast V-carb, starting at the back of the grid, I really like the opportunity for him to get a bunch of overtakes and get that cost cap gain. So I think he is the #1 tier C asset heading into this week.
Yeah, completely agree. I think Hulk's a great and consistent option too, but the price gain upside, the points that Yuki has for overtakes at the back. I mean, you did say they are a quick car, and I don't disagree with that, but the F1 race and quali sims have them well down the order. So I was surprised to see that there, but I also don't think that should discount Yuki as a driver generally, because the Saubers are dreadful, and so I think they're easy overtakes there. Sargent's mediocre at best on his best day, so I think there's still at least 3 to 4 easy overtakes for Yuki, and even if he gets 7-8 points, that still might be enough for a price rise. So I think definitely over Hulk, Jonathan.
Agreed. All right. Johnny wants to know, am I crazy for considering McLaren V-Carb, Max, and Norris? I think in light of what Rob just shared, that V-Carb is projected to be one of the slowest cars on the grid, I wouldn't recommend it, just because you might have 2 drivers out of Q3. I think in Yuki's case, you'll definitely have 2 drivers out of Q3, because I don't think they'll push it through too many qualifying sessions in the wet. And then you're relying on Danny Rick to get you 5 of the teammate points by getting all the way to Q3 in wet conditions. So that's a tough look. V-Carb never gets fastest pit stop points, and then Yuki starting from the back of the grid would have to get pretty high up to make that constructor work for you. Compared to your Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull constructors, I think that delta's a little too big.
Another interesting thing to note on V-Carb, and more specifically Ricciardo, is that there was some news around Yuki potentially staying out as long as possible to give Ricciardo a tow. So I would fully expect, even if it is in the wet, that it's setting Danny Rick up for at least a Q2 appearance if he can get a good lead, Yuki can give him a good lead there. And I think obviously the higher Ricciardo qualifies, the worse it is for him because of how bad this race simulation pace is for the V-Carb. So I would be steering clear of Ricciardo this weekend for that reason too.
It's a great point, Rob. And similarly, a lot of people have asked us, what if Yuki doesn't post a qualifying time in qualifying and he starts the weekend with a -5? I think that's really unlikely because as soon as they deem it wet conditions, the 107% rule goes out the window. So even if Yuki shows up, posts a lap, that's enough to post a representative time for the sake of qualifying. It's not that if he's not within 107% of the P1 time that he would get that penalty.
That's a great point. One other thing as well is, again, there's a lot of stuff around, who's in that second Red Bull seat. And so I would suspect that maybe Yuki, again, probably V-Carb have more of a say on this than Tsunoda does, but he probably will want to still put in a good qualifying performance as much as possible to show them what he is truly capable of. So I think Ricciardo are going to do as much as they possibly can to put their best foot forward before Red Bull debrief over summer.
Got some new folks coming into the chat. Hi, Mike. Hi, Aston. Mike, I know just came over from Zach's chat, and it was very, very busy over there. Mike, let me know if Zach ended up with that Max and Red Bull build that he had been teasing for parts of the hour. Be interesting to see what some of our peers are looking at this week.
I've got Zach on the other screen. It currently looks like Lando, McLaren, and Red Bull as his current team. So you never know.
That's basically what I have right now. So we'll see. And then F1 Fantasy Tips, I think he's out for a lot of the afternoon, and he posted a team that is Max and Red Bull already. So they're starting to get some of that coverage into Red Bull already.
Looks like he's following F1 Fantasy Tool Sims very closely. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few more people going in that direction. Should we get through a few lineups? I know we've got 15 minutes additional this week, but I don't want to take too many liberties of running over time, despite the fact we've got quite a bit to get through regardless.
That sounds good. Okay, so we'll start with this first lineup. And Bottas, they say this is the current team. The issue is where from here, as the balance seems okay at the moment. So this is looking at some of that Ferrari build that the Sims have started to talk up a little bit. So you could move from a Sainz to George Russell, get a little bit more Mercedes coverage. But I agree, this is a pretty balanced team. And if you get all the way out into a max build, you're probably taking -10 this week and -10 in Zandvoort. So I like something around this, or maybe a little bit more Mercedes coverage in the drivers.
Yeah, I think you could go a couple different directions. My first point of view would be to get McLaren in, just because of how good Lando and Oscar have both looked. It might be via Ferrari or Mercedes, either one. And perhaps that would require needing to move down Ricciardo, who we just talked about, is probably not a great option. So that might be a McLaren, Ferrari, Ricciardo out. And where does that leave us? Could we get to like Bottas or Zhou?
It would be close.
It would be close. You might have to also think about moving out Sainz for Russell as a third. And you've got 3 trades handy, so it's not the end of the world if you went, I'd say, like Russell Bottas or Russell Zhou Ferrari. Sorry.
You'd be good with either Sauber.
Yeah. Sainz, Ricciardo, Ferrari out, and a Sauber in with Russell and McLaren. That's probably my point of view there.
Agreed. That's a good substitution there.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at Coke in 87. So we've got 3 flavors of options, and this is very similar to, Rob, what you and I are looking at this week. Triple McLaren with Sargent, Bottas, Hulkenberg, triple McLaren, double Williams, Bottas, and an even mix of McLaren and Mercedes with double Williams, Sauber. So I think the interesting question here is, how good do we think Alex Albon will be? And can he displace Nico Hulkenberg, who's been a pretty solid foundation of points and cost cap gain, except for last week when he put up a goose egg?
I think it's the difference between Hulk and Albon is not going to be that big, which is why I really like either of the two on the left, to be quite honest. I think maybe the Haas race pace probably edges it slightly, but I don't think it's a big difference at all between the two drivers. And also, I think Haas have good straight line speed at Spa too. So For me, I'd probably take the left team.
Same. Yeah, I think having that balance would be good just in case anything's a little bit off with the Williams. Alex hasn't proven a whole lot of value in these last few races. I would like to see him be fast here, and then I'll be more confident by the time we get to, say, Monza or other faster races in the second half.
Oh, we have more lineups, but I think the ones we picked before were probably our picks, unless you go for a Verstappen.
Yeah, my take is if you can afford triple McLaren and it's not going to totally undo you in terms of the number of moves it takes to get there, I would definitely do that. It ultimately comes down to what can you do in the fewest moves among all of these.
Yep. Smooth operator.
Fantastic. So Max Mercedes McLaren versus Max Russell Mercedes McLaren versus Lando Red Bull McLaren with decent TRC drivers. So this is a really good budget.
Really good budget. I'm about 2 million short of this, but I really like the Max one on the left. You get 2 good drivers, 2 good constructors. That's good enough for me.
Agreed. So you get max coverage with no Checo and no -10. Left one for me.
Yep. Bingo.
All right, let's move over to Feint. Here we are with a lot of options here. The current team is triple Mercedes, and I can see why you might have a little cold feet with triple Mercedes the way they've looked so far. Option 2 would be splitting with Lewis and Oscar. That's a good build. And then you have some options on the bottom that get you to max.
Yeah. Let me just zoom in a little bit on my screen because my eyesight's probably not as good as it was 10 years ago.
It's okay. They made a really small note on the side of each of them. So for the bottom 2, the Verstappen build leaves 4.9 million in the tank, which is worrisome. You could perhaps upgrade Sargent to someone better, but then you might be out of transfers at that point. So you're starting to take a -10 to upgrade Sargent. Option 4 is a -10, and then you're starting to get into transfer jail if you do that too.
Yeah, you're right. You're essentially having to rejig this team over a couple of weeks on the bottom right if you go for something like that. But I do like them all. I think like the least amount of work with the most amount of upside is probably kind of where my head's at. So I do like the top right.
Me too. Yeah. Let's do the spread because my theory is that Mercedes, when they undo those upgrades in the colder conditions, will come back. But if I'm wrong, you've hedged it with a recent race winner that I think is a lock for a podium in Oscar.
Yep. Nice. Oh, better zoom out here. Ashun. Love the synopsis on the left. Makes our life so much easier. 186. Thinking about moving to triple McLaren, as you have mentioned, to be the best alternative building cap, adding Piastri, but also meaning moving, having double Sauber and Sauber and Sargent. Isn't a big change. It's worth the downgrade. If I went triple McLaren, I would be running that right-hand team, and the left-hand team is my team from Budapest. So I've been thinking about both of these lineups, and another one under consideration for me is to move out Lando and Hulkenberg. Sorry, Lando and Zhou for Piastri and Tsunoda, which I think is a little bit random for me, but I think the fact I've thought about all of these, I really like them all. Do you want to provide an objective answer, Adam? Because I can't seem to yet.
So I like Haas at this circuit compared to Sauber. Maybe it's neck and neck between Hulkenberg and Albon per our previous question, but Hulkenberg clearly over Zhou, and I think that's enough for me to slide toward the team on the left. I also worry about what this will mean coming out of the break, because you're going to have 3 pretty lousy drivers that I think will be at the 3 points or less, losing money again sort of scenario come Zandvoort. So this is maybe one of the few times I would not lean toward triple McLaren, is if you have to take up so much sacrifice at the bottom of your team. Yeah. And this goes back to what Leapfrog had said in some of his advice for teams that are trying to chase. He said, when you're ready to make that move to the next tier of team, don't rush it with a bottom line like you have on the right. You just build the cost cap slowly and surely so you don't have so much risk anchoring your team.
Nice assessment there.
Luis asked an interesting question in the chat. Do you think this is a limitless chip kind of race?
Probably not, just because of all the overtakes that other drivers can score in the midfield. And last year, I think we saw, I'm trying to remember, five C-tier drivers have double-digit points at Belgium. So I think the likelihood of a team with good, reliable midfield drivers or two premium drivers probably, I wouldn't say matches anywhere close to a limitless team, but it's, I don't think the spread of points is as big on this kind of weekend as it might be on a sprint.
Agreed. Really, the question is, can you correctly predict the 5 top drivers and the 2 top constructors? Red Bull and McLaren probably are the top 2 constructors, and then as the drivers, Max, double McLaren, and then what of the Mercedes, Ferrari? Is there a midfield driver that gets a ton of overtakes, like Rob said, that then jumps in? It's a little less certain. So I would wait until the grid order is very clear. And plus, with the rain today, it could really throw everything off. And then all of a sudden, there could be a surprise, like a Fernando Alonso that qualifies low and moves way up, or something we're not expecting.
Yeah, good point. Should we? There's a couple of other questions around chips from William, Dive 2K, around final fix, no negative. What's your 2 cents there? And Radio Paddock just asked about the Piastri final fix into what I assume would be in what looks like Max. So what's your thoughts on final fix strategy? Because there's been a couple of really interesting approaches thrown around this morning.
Yeah, so for anyone who's not caught up on this is another idea that I think originated with our friend Leapfrog. And the theory is you would have Piastri, 4 softer drivers on the team, and a lot of money left over. Run him in qualifying, which means that he would be the driver that you get cost cap gains for as a tier B asset that should do really well. After qualifying, you make sure Max is looking okay. You final fix Verstappen in, then you're going to get those race points with Piastri's cost cap gain, which could be somewhere on the order of $1 million. And we're running out of time before Piastri becomes a threat to be a tier A asset. So this is one of the big questions. For me, I don't think I quite have an appetite for it yet. Thinking back to last year, incidents like Qatar with Carlos Sainz, where he was a DNS and then you'd be a sitting duck. I might wait until a little bit later in the year if I'm going to do a final fix to enable cost cap play.
I don't. Yeah, you're so right. I don't think this is the last time we'll see an opportunity to play on the cost cap and an extra trade in our pocket. And I think I'd much rather get to the end of the season and then use it in the last couple races than get to a point like, as you said, in Qatar, where you're an auto -20 if your driver ultimately can't start the race. So we'll have to wait and see, but probably not for this week for me. I think it's a great strategy, but I think it's quite subjective.
And Andrew, if you're out there, let us know. Are you going with the frog theory, or was it just something that was floated? Because Andrew's now P2 in the global league, and this is pretty significant if he goes for it. This would be breaking news.
Yeah, it would be huge. Just on the no negative, Dive 2K. Do you think, Adam, it's time to use the chip this weekend?
I still tend to lean toward it on a sprint weekend because you could lose positions or DNF across 2 events, but I can see why you'd be tempted to. The grid order could get really shaken up during qualifying. You might have teams not quite get the balance of a wet setup versus a dry setup. And then I just hate turn 1. I have to hold my breath at this circuit on turn 1 because it's this big, nasty turn. We saw Piastri and Sainz go into each other on turn 1 last year that ended Piastri's day immediately, and then Sainz is a bit up the road. So I'll definitely be keeping my fingers and toes crossed on lap 1. Definitely. And that's, I guess, a reason why some folks might want to have more McLarens, Yuki, and back markers. You have the front, the back, and none of that meat grinder in the middle. So definitely one being on the scale for that side.
Definitely. I know we're getting close to bringing on Terry as well. Let's knock out a couple more questions because there have been a few new entrants, and then we can get the great man in for his technical corner.
Mike says he is frogging. So final fix for Mike. Awesome. I can't wait to see how it plays out for you. I wish you many points.
Brian asked around the pricing in the mid-season break. That was only because they had screwed up the pricing model to begin with, which was why we saw that happen midway through last year with the Aston Martins, but I don't see anything happening to Price this year.
There's this very interesting question of what happens if drivers are replaced during the midseason break. The easy one is Sargent. He becomes inactive. The new driver, assuming they're not on the grid today, becomes active. If Perez is replaced by an active driver, presumably Ricciardo or Tsunoda, that's where things get very strange because we have a few options. Either the existing driver stays at the same price and you have the best value on the whole grid, a $10.5 million Red Bull. They just pump up the price of that asset, which means you get 4 or 5 million free, which I think would upend the whole game. It wouldn't be fair. But then probably the most likely thing in my mind is that you inactivate, let's say it's Danny Rick. You inactivate the Danny Rick RB asset and stand up the more expensive Danny Rick Red Bull asset. And then there would cause some confusion because you could have 2 Danny Ricks on your team theoretically. But
yeah,
I think that's how they would figure that out.
Got it. Yep. Fully agree. A couple questions around Albon versus Bottas and Gasly for this weekend, Adam.
Albon versus Bottas. I would take Albon in this case. There's at least a little chance of him soaring past people. Sauber is still a bit slow.
Got it. And then Gasly, I think if you've had him the last couple of weeks, you've probably been burnt by him. Probably don't love him, but I think he's fine. Alpine. There's questions around their reliability. I wouldn't be running more than one Alpine driver this weekend. I think he's fine, but pretty evenly matched in terms of fantasy points between him, Albon, Ocon, according to the Sims at the very least anyway.
Yeah, Frano would want to know thoughts on Gasly this weekend. A lot of people said surely he's not going to DNF 3 weekends in a row, but I'm sure you said last week, surely he won't DNF 2 races in a row. And then you saw Ocon in FP1 and said, oh no, the Deadpool and Wolverine liveries are already coming back to bite us. So I think it's truly, I think in the gambling world, about a 8 to 15% chance that any driver DNFs in a given week. And you've just got to wonder, just reset. Will that lightning strike 3 times in a row? Got it. It's probably time to get in, Terry. I know we've been yapping for the last half an hour, and I know people, Jezelik has asked for our lineups, which we'll actually, I should probably post that too, but let's get Terry in now. We can go through everything in relation to technical stuff. All right. So you know him from F1 Coffee Corner and the Tech Corner articles on fanamp.com. He is the busiest guy in F1 content creation, and it's the one and only Terry. Terry, welcome to the show.
See, you've been talking, I've been scribbling.
Adrian,
tell me about it. What have you been scribbling?
All sorts. Climatic changes to rules, part firmware relaxing, max engines, Mercedes updates, loads. I want to start with the bombshell, because before we came on air, you had a theory about Max's power unit. Could you share it with the rest of us and the likelihood of that being what we see this weekend? I have a theory and I have an answer. So the theory which was going around was obviously Max has taken a new engine or a new ICE component. However, that may not have been in the car for today, because according to the FIA rules, you can take the penalty for the component, but you can go back to the old one at any time you're allowed to do so, and you don't have to notify when you do that. So there was a theory, considering the weather, whether or not that Red Bull were going to sit on it and save it and put the old one back in. However, Christian has said the new one is in Max's car. He confirmed about 30 minutes ago. So if we believe Christian, it's in Max's car. However, we have no way of confirming that, but that's what Red Bull is saying, that it is the new ICE in Max's car.
We were this close to turning everything upside down, but thank you for bringing some logic back to the table.
Well, that's the story out of Red Bull. That's what they're saying. They're obviously changed a lot of setups. So Max has gone back to more of the FP1 setup that we saw. He tried a different one for FP2, and they're also trying lots of different parts between the cars. Actually, interestingly, Checo and Max are running very different setups this weekend. Sort of Max has got the hungry front nose. Checo isn't running there. All sorts are going on between. There's very much a mixed match of setups on 2 Red Bulls. That's for sure.
I'd like to just stick with the theme of Red Bull while we've got you, Terry. Max obviously very well documented with that 10-place grid penalty, probably starts somewhere between P11 and P13. What's the kind of likelihood you see from him making it to a podium? Do you think he passes most of those cars outside the top 5 with ease, or is it something that is just going to be a bit of a tough ask for him at this track?
A couple of things. One, it obviously depends where he qualifies, because ultimately you'd expect him to be near the top, but is he going to push it? It's raining. The F2 has just been postponed, I believe. So in terms of the track itself, it's clearly a wet, dangerous track. So how much are they going to push? How much running we actually going to get? So that could just throw everything into the mix. I think if he qualifies where we expect him to, around sort of 10th, 11th, 12th, you probably expected him to come 4th or 5th in a dry race with a new power unit in, like Red Bull are saying, and what they've got. I'm not sure that they've got enough of an advantage this year to get him a win or a podium. Bear in mind if the McLarens qualify well. In these changing climates, they tend to be really good at saving their tyres. We saw at Silverstone, they were quite fast and in the mixture between the two. So I think the race wouldn't be too much and potentially a podium. But I can see him certainly making a load of places, a load of points up, definitely.
But do you see that? Do you see that same optimism across the garage for Perez? Because I think I worry about him in wet conditions, in changing conditions. He's just got no momentum for his drive right now. For those teams that are considering the Red Bull constructor, does he carry that same amount of optimism that you'd have for Max?
He doesn't, but then he's also in a last chance saloon, which kind of makes me feel that he's worth a punt. I've gone with it. Because he's got all or nothing, really. Because the talk is, we know that he's already been gone. We know that there's film days being set up to test drivers by VCARB. There's lots going on in the summer break, which is leading towards it. So he's got his back against the wall, and it's going to go one in two ways, isn't it? He's either going to have a disaster like he had last weekend, or actually he might just come through and put in absolute stonking performance to try and save his seat. So you don't know which checker you're going to get, do you?
It's usually whichever one I haven't put on my team.
Yeah, I've selected him, so everyone else probably don't, because that's what's going to happen whenever I choose Checo. So yeah, that's definitely my theory on it.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. I just don't think I've got enough faith in Checo after kind of what we've seen from him so far, Terry. So very helpful there. Any other kind of surprises or thoughts on other drivers further back in the pack? Mercedes have looked a little bit off. I was hearing from, I think, Jolyon Palmer on the F1 TV broadcast yesterday that Mercedes may not have had their car turned up to full level of performance. Was there any news on that, or is it just one of those tracks where they may not be as good as they've been recently?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. They've actually taken off most of their updates. Toto's talked about, he said, we've taken off substantial amount of the updates. The floors, the biggest one, that hasn't worked at all. They found a discrepancy in the performance yesterday. They couldn't get the answers for it, so they stripped it completely off for today, which will be qualified in the race. So a lot of the other parts are interlinked with it. So the diffuser areas, they all kind of came as a package. So it's safe to say that they've all come off it. We know that Vesti was in the sim all night, running in various different setups. So classic Mercedes tends to be, they blow hot and cold with the two. So if they've had a bad Friday, actually, you fancy them quite good for that. Setup they're going is pre-Spa, so you're probably looking at Silverstone, Hungary sort of setup-wise. Silverstone in those changing conditions, they were great, but you worry if it's going to be a completely dry race, whether or not they've got the speed to cope on some of these sectors, because they were losing a hell of a lot yesterday. I mean, I know with the engine turned up, going back to the old floor, it's not going to be as bad as that, but it's still, I don't think, going to put them anywhere near the sort of contention that they need to be in. But whether or not, I don't think I've seen enough from Ferrari either to say that Ferrari are going to be a safer bet than them either. We saw Carlos go out in the gravel. I think they're caught in two minds over their setup as well. So
this is going to be a very interesting week for sure. I know people haven't been beating down our doors with Lance Stroll questions, but is there any word on their ability to rebuild and recover the car for him to start qualifying?
The car got recovered under the red flag, which is good news. They got to start work on it early, so it actually came back early. So the FIA actually got it back to the garage a lot earlier than what they expected. So he didn't come back at the end of the session. He actually came back during the red flag, which is great news for getting it ready. Lance is back after being checked out. He's fine to compete. That was just more of a precaution because of the impact. But he's fine to race. They haven't said either way, but they did get it back early, and they're not saying that they don't think they're going to get it ready. So I think he may be okay, but not confirmed either way yet.
Excellent.
Interesting.
Terry, let me ask you the tough questions. Which vessel should Rob do his shoey out of? Because Boot is currently leading.
I'm not too sure. Are they full blown work boots? Because they
are a Timberland. It's about 10 years old, so yeah. I think it's going to be pretty disgusting. I drank the last shoey out of this same shoe last year, but I don't really smell any traces of beer in here, so I think we're good to go for this time around.
Oh, I think that one then definitely.
So Boot is currently leading, and Terry endorses it. That's fantastic. The other question I had for you too is the resurfacing of this track. I know this is typically a high overtake circuit. In response to the resurfacing, a lot of drivers said it felt quicker. Could we see even more overtaking, or is that for other practical purposes they resurfaced it?
No, we could see all of the support races before obviously the wet weather hit were showing faster lap times and faster times being posted. So definitely it's a possibility. It all depends how much of the sort of grips left, I suppose, after the rain's been washing everything out and the lack of support races on it. We know that these cars love it when it's had a full support race, loads of tyre grip has been laid down. If it carries on like it's going to do in terms of rain and everything else, you've pretty much washed out what's been laid over the past couple of days. So you're starting a bit afresh from that tomorrow. But the resurfacing doesn't look like it's going to hinder it anyway, put it that way. It certainly doesn't look like it's going to be an issue. But you have got that second DRS detection zone been moved by 75 meters. So that might make an impact on overtaking. It's been shortened. So that might play a part in less overtakes. I mean, the idea is it might actually give more, but you can never tell when they start messing with DRS zones whether or not that's going to make an impact either way.
That's that's really interesting. And I think there's probably going to be a few surprises, particularly in the wet as well this afternoon with qualifying. So I've got a few, not predictions, but definitely an expectation that we might see a few teams further down the order and a few teams kind of surprising us in Q3. Any bets from you as to who might surprise us out of the blocks?
I think qualifying is going to be a surprise because some of the teams I think are going to try and go for it, certainly at the lower end, to try and bank some laps and get a good position, then try and sort of hold on tomorrow. Would be my recommendation. Whereas a lot of the other teams are going to maybe tread with a bit of caution. We talked about the setups. I know Adams, talked last week about this climatic changes, which they say. So this is where the FIA basically announced climatic changes, where the weather's two extreme differences. If they do that, then you're allowed to have changes in the part firmly relaxed, so brake ducts, cooling, all these things. So, but you won't know that until tomorrow. So you've got to take a bit of a gamble today on what your setup is. Now the teams might be thinking, actually, if it's torrential rain today, dry tomorrow, we do it because we know that they're going to say it's different tomorrow, so we can switch it back to a normal setup. Or do you play safe and go on anyone that's going to cover for both, which it's going to compromise your performance tomorrow, whatever you choose to go with today, because those conditions out there today are pretty bad from what we're seeing. So I think that there's going to be some surprises, and I think timing is just going to be absolutely crucial. This has got red flag written all over it, to be honest. Wherever you look in terms of the qualifying session, with what we're seeing condition wise, I think that you're going to have to bank an early lap and kind of get it on the board, but then that might cause traffic visibility. It's a bit of a lucky dip. I'm now rethinking my strategy this week, because I was going to go Piastri, Tsunoda in, Norris, Zhou out, but I feel as though Piastri, I don't know, I just have a gut feel as soon as I go away from the popular picks in Verstappen and Norris, it's going to backfire. So now I'm rethinking 30 minutes before we get to the deadline. I mean, teams are clearly making changes. So Charles Leclerc, Joe, and Hulkenberg have all got new gearboxes being fitted after free practice as well. So they've all been fit. There's no penalty for those. They're still within the allowance. So the teams are obviously tweaking, moving, making changes to cars. I don't think they know what their best setup is. They've got no running time from FP3 at all. You've got teams like Mercedes who have no running with changing their setup. So that is the ultimate gamble, really. The sim will only tell you so much, as we know. So, yeah, it's going to be, I think, could be wild.
Terry, let me hear about what your lineup looks like, because in this show for Hungary last week, I was lined up to have Pierre Gasly. You said, I'm going to take a punt on Yuki, and I followed your lead and saved myself about 30 points and a transfer in the process. So I want to know what pearls of wisdom you have for us this week.
I've brought Perez back in as the Red Bull, so I've got Max, Logan, the 2 Sauber drivers, Yuki, and Red Bull and McLaren.
Ooh, that is the F1 Fantasy Tools big pick. Is all Red Bull all the time.
There's 2 reasons. One, because I pressed lock it in by mistake, so I can't change it. So while I was messing with it, and 2, why not? I just think Checo was something to prove. Yeah, we've seen this in the past. Bahrain springs to mind a few seasons back when he's fighting for his seat. He is someone who is capable of producing a performance in terms of that. And then obviously Max, I think, will come back through. And like I think you said earlier with Yuki, I kind of fancy him to start taking the Saubers, the Alpines potentially, and the sort of Williams at that back end from the back of the grid with absolutely everything brand new on that car. So
interesting. What's to think about? Does that make your decision any easier, Adam?
No. No, because it basically puts me back to my 2 choices are Lando, Russell, because I'd take a penalty for Piastri. So I think they're close enough where I wouldn't take the penalty, or Max. I hadn't even thought about Max, Red Bull, McLaren, Triple Sauber, which I can get into with only a few transfers, and it is the most recommended Writer Sims pick.
Yeah, I think I benefited from running Max the past few weeks in terms of coming into this week, because obviously it's a move I haven't had to make. He's already been in there, so that kind of made it a bit easier. And the Mercedes one just feels a bit unpredictable with what's going on with their car. And to strip everything off your car, you clearly aren't happy with it, despite what they may think. And with no active running, they don't know whether reverting back has actually helped them or not. There's no sort of way of knowing that in the sense of on-track action. So that's kind of filled me with a bit of... I probably think that Checo in a car that he's been driving is a bit more of a safer bet than 2 Mercedes drivers where we don't know what their setup's doing or what their car's doing in these conditions, to be honest.
Fair enough. Well, we got to get our team locked in. And
did you see the end of Zach's stream? Or did anybody see the end of Zach's stream? Is that another data point we should throw in?
I think it's still going, and he's still on land. Looks like he's going to run Lando, McLaren, Red Bull, and final fix in Max.
Okay.
Well, he's leaving 6. Looks like he's leaving 6 million on the side, so it looks like a Max move could be.
That would have to be a final fix. Yeah, I don't think you'd leave that much on the table.
Yeah.
Holy moly, Terry! Any final thoughts before we get back to our lineup reviews?
No, I think you saw the weather looks dry for tomorrow. It doesn't look like there's much chance of rain tomorrow, so that'll put it back to a normal 2-stop strategy. Medium and hard tyres. Don't think we see the softs being much use around here. 19 seconds for pit loss. Has got a 70% chance of a safety car though, so that's high in terms of percentages. I know we had Formula One was saying 100% earlier this season, which was just a no-go on that one. But 70% safety car around here is quite usual, even in the dry and the wet. So certainly one to bear in mind in terms of what happens on. But I think that we've got a week where people are just going to get lucky, personally, looking at it. Pure and simple. Data-wise, there isn't the data. So I think it's purely a case of there's going to be a group of individuals who have, strike out lucky with it, a group which unfortunately don't with these weather conditions.
Well, Terry, thank you so much for your insight. Again, a lot of good information came out in the last few minutes. So best of luck to you and your team, and we'll see you after the break.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Terry.
So, Rob, I'll let you pick. One of us should probably get to work setting their teams. Oh, look, it's just me. One of us should get to work setting our teams while the other one handles some questions in the chat. I'll let you pick. Would you like me to work on my team and post it first, or would you like some time to look and post your team?
I think I've given myself so much head noise since speaking to Terry that I've somewhat pivoted back to the lineup I probably just had in Budapest, because I think for me, Sonoda is appealing, but now I'm thinking, is going someone that's not Max or Lando as the 2X really worth the risk for a little bit of price gain? So may just stick with Lando. I'm probably going to have to change my tweet now that I'm about to fire it off. But if you want to, maybe why don't I'll just stick with it. I'm going to make one trade. It will be, I've got Zhou, but now I'm like, well, what can I do? So do you have your team locked in your mind?
Not really. No, I was going to start messing around with it and then see what happens. William says trust the simulation, which I'm very close to, William, because I can get to max Red Bull on 3 moves. I can get out of max and Red Bull with just a -10. I'd only hit it 1 week. When I'm wrong, I'm more than 10 points worth of wrong these last few weeks. So a -10 shouldn't scare me too much. So
I think, yeah, I agree with William, but as I've said, I can trust the simulation, but the net effect is going to be 0 points after the next 2 weeks, because if I get Max in for a -10, he has to essentially leave my team the following week. If he wasn't on a grid penalty, the decision would be much easier. But anyway, I just don't know, Adam. I just don't know.
How about this? So if you cover off a few questions from the chat or one of the lineups, I will do it right now. I will pick something. I will just take a deep breath and lock something in.
Go on. Do that. I will cover off the questions and do my very best to ask them. All right, let's go back a bit pre-Terry. Ferrari or Mercedes? I think it's tough, Ost. If you're going for Ferrari, you want to be convinced it's more than a 1 week hold, or you're more than likely removing them for a -10, or you're probably removing them in Zandvoort. So whatever constructor of the two you think's a longer term hold. Alpine cooking, Arjun asks. I think they're probably cooking up a P15. I wouldn't say they're cooking anything more than that, and reliability is questionable to say the least. So probably not. Who else have we got? I think I asked Wildcard Michael Page. I mean, sure. If you think it's worth if your trades are -20s or more, then absolutely go for it. But I do think that it's probably team dependent in that case. Is RB or Haas a better pick? I'd say Haas for this week. Race pace looks stronger.
Agreed. We have some folks in our community that have been talking about potentially a triple Haas super budget build lineup, because if you put them in the Sims, Haas is predicted to get some of the biggest cost cap gain of any constructor. But that might scare me off a little too much.
Aston, you're so right, mate. This week's another week of points deductions. I'm just not sure I can be bothered with -10s. I've already taken 3 this season. Gasly or Albon? Yeah, I agree, Joel. Probably Albon, but it's pretty close. So Joel said Tom Popperman's going with Russell, Lando, Sargent, Zhou, Hulkenberg, McLaren, Mercedes. That's what I had. That's what I had in Budapest, but it seems silly to not use a single trade this week. And I feel like Piastri just seems a little too adventurous. I would have gone Tsunoda over Hulkenberg, but I'm 0.2 million short. So, yeah, not sure what to do here. Kai, Norris, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, Gasly, Albon. With McLaren and Mercedes 0.2 million left, would it be worth to swap out Gasly for Albon and Albon for Magnussen and Zhou? I'd say it's going to be close. I think Magnussen definitely the highest scorer of those 4. Zhou's not really making an impact. Let's say Magnussen scores 10 points. I think Zhou scores 2 points. Gasly and Albon probably score 5 or 6 points each. So it's pretty even, I would say. Lando, Piastri and Ferrari, or Max, Tsunoda and Red Bull? I am going to say... Ooh. Let's try and break it down. I think... I want to say Max, but my heart says Max, but my head says McLaren. Probably because I want McLaren next week as well. I can't trust Checo either, Freddie. Actually, we should probably go through some lineups. Sorry. I realized we've neglected those. So I'll do that while Adam sorts out his team. Jeremy, yeah, if we can get the lineups back up on the screen, I'll cover off as many as possible.
I'm back from my lineup hiatus. I'm ready to jump back in.
You posted your team. Do you want me to cover it off quickly?
It's up to you. I haven't posted it yet because if you wanted to do this first, we can do this first. If you want me to hit post, we can cover that off first. Whatever.
Why don't I make my moves and you go through some of the questions for
Sounds good. All right. So we have Jeremy's team up on screen and he has several options that I'm zoomed way in on. All right. So roll one transfer, triple McLaren, but you've got to run double Williams. Triple McLaren, you bring in Yuki. Oh, I really like that. Then -10s for Red Bull or Max and Red Bull. So I would probably say you want some coverage of Yuki. So I would rule out option number 1. And if you are sensitive to the -10s, team 2 gives you no -10 this week, no -10 next week, because I think you're going to want a lot of McLaren coverage. If you're okay with a -10, it really depends on how daring you feel and how you're chasing the other people in your league. So if your league is leaning toward where Tom and Rob are with Mercedes and McLaren coverage and you're trailing, I would go heavier Red Bull, like those second 2 lineups. If you're in the driver's seat and you're trying to just fend them off, I wouldn't be too reckless with Red Bull if you're trying to defend a lead. And to me, at this point, a -10 isn't too scary. I think you may need a -10 coming out of the break on the last team. But again, -10 versus being very wrong is a small price to pay for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Oh God, the questions for the lineups in the chat are flying thick and fast as well.
We're all in some trouble. Rob, I'm gonna post my lineup right now. It is posted, and let's get to it because it's about to get interesting.
Yeah, Kevin, I haven't made my final moves, and I want to shout out Luke in the chat because he's one of my mates dropping through. He's asked McLaren, Mercedes, Max, Sonoda, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Sargent. Thoughts? Dropped Piastri and Russell. Yeah, mate, I think that's perfectly fine. I'll probably end up going Russell, Norris. But what do you think, Adam? Max and 4 good premiums, 4 good midfielders.
Do you want to head over? It's up to you. I can either spell it out, or if you want to, if you're on if Twitter is up.
No, it's in the chat. It's in the chat.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you're talking about my team or.
No, sorry, no.
Perhaps maybe we should bring up my team because the answer is there.
Okay, let's bring your team up on the screen. Let me just move this across. This is you. Oh wow! Okay, here we go. He's gone.
Yep, this is the problem with setting my lineup on the live stream, guys.
Yeah,
I had McLaren and Mercedes ready to go the whole weekend, and then I realized that in our Creators League, the teams that I'm contending with are running Max and Red Bull in Terry and F1 Fantasy Tips. The teams I'm looking to make a move on, you and Tom, are running heavy Mercedes, and Terry's given me just enough doubt that Mercedes could have this set up wrong this weekend, or they're in a state of flux. So I was able to get into this with my 3 transfers that I had carried over. So at worst, I'm looking at a -10. And I feel good about this because I get the max coverage without a whole bunch of lousy drivers beneath them. Still get Sonoda for the overtake points. Still get Hulkenberg for the cost cap gain. So I think I've got this balance of high points and a couple of drivers that can beef up my cost cap heading into
if I were you and I could get to that without a -10 in both weeks, I would do it. But unfortunately, I just can't. So
I think part of this too is that I'm such a big Mercedes fan. I'd rather not have them in my lineup and maybe give them some good luck, some good juju out there. And if something bad happens to Red Bull, I'll only be half sad because the action on track will be good news for me.
I think there's enough engaged strategists this week running Red Bull that you probably don't need to worry. Right. I need to do the shoey and I need to lock in my lineup. So do you want to cover off chat? Do you want to cover off teams on the base? And I will spend 3 minutes looking at my lineup panic stations and get it sorted now.
Head Chef says final fix Verstappen, Gasly, Sonoda, or Sargent and Magnussen. Oh, Rob, could you go down to slide 9 on your screen? Did you do that one already?
I have not. No.
Okay. Oh boy. I like, in light of what I've said throughout some of my team description, I like the second team, Final Fix Verstappen, or Gasly to Tsunoda in the third team. I think getting coverage of Tsunoda is going to be important for points and cost cap gains. So whatever you can do to get him in, that's why I'd rule out the first and fourth teams. Let's, Rob, could you scroll down one slide for me, please? No worries. All right. MP3 age. They're running triple McLaren, and then it's a matter of how do we move out of it. I would rule out the Ferrari team just because I think they haven't quite proven to me that they're ready to make that step yet. And then going back to our points from earlier in the show, it just depends on, one, how bad you want that Yuki coverage, and two, do you think, like Terry mentioned earlier, that in a do or die scenario, Sergio Perez is going to come through for Red Bull? For me, I think that chance is just worth it to the point where I'd look at that second team. But if I see your cost cap right, you might have a little extra in reserve. So let's make some improvements among these bottom drivers, if that's 5 or 6 million, whatever you have there.
Okay, I've gone with my gut. I'm sticking with my plan before the stream because if I pivot away from it, I'm gonna hate myself for it, even if it's the wrong outcome. I think since I had a disastrous weekend in Imola, I've always been of the view that it's better to just go with what I had heading into the stream than to completely change it in the last 60 minutes. So Piastri will be my 2x this week. Definitely very different to most people, but that's just how it goes.
So Piastri, Russell, Mercedes, McLaren?
Correct. Yep. Tsunoda and Joe. Yep. All right. It's locked. And the team is posted.
Fantastic. All right, Rob, I'll keep going through these as you prepare the shoey, and we still have the contest question to cover off, so we'll keep rapid firing. Can you just scroll down to slide 11 for me? And Joe's team, Joe is triple McLaren versus double Red Bull and Tsunoda. So you know what I went with, Joe? It's the team on the left with a Sauber instead of Albon. It's really just a matter of preference at this point. Do you think that Red Bull are going to make this comeback? The F1 Fantasy Tools Sims say they will. So when in doubt, even if they fail, say, hey, I went with my gut and I went with the Sims. The team on the right is going to be the one that you want coming out of the break. So just a matter of preference for you at this point. All right. Rob, could you head down one more for me, please, to Luke? Luke, similar boat, my friend. Looks like you have a much better cost cap situation than we do. You floated the idea of triple Haas. I just don't have the stomach for it. So I would lean toward team 2. Basically, Ocon. Ooh, it's close. Norris and Ocon versus Verstappen and Sargent. I think it depends on your transfer situation coming out of the break. If Sargent gets dumped and you want to get out of Verstappen, can you still make all of that work? If you can, I like the last team. Again, me leaning more toward Pro Max this week. I bet you if Rob were in the mix on this, he'd like team 2 a little bit more. Stick with the McLaren and Mercedes builds.
That's right. We were talking about the Haas triple up, weren't we? And this last couple of lineups, I'm good. My team's posted. As soon as we get through these last, I'll post my team. I'll show my team, and we'll get the shoey done.
Breakfast of Champs. I recommend with the 2.4 million Breakfast of Champs, you go Albon to Magnussen. Because I think you can afford it with the extra 2.4.
Yep.
Or get at it. Well, no, there's not a whole lot you can do with Sargent there. So yeah, maybe doing that. You could also free up cost cap by going Ferrari to Mercedes. I think it's a differential play. And if you need something spicy, like I've done with my team, Ferrari is spicy, but also you could be on an island by yourself if they haven't put it all together this week. And then lastly, basically a flavor of your team, Rob. Piastri, Hamilton versus Max and Yuki. Basically, it depends on which one of us you think is going to have a sad summer break, Rob or I, because we've basically gone in these two directions.
I think for points the left and for cost cap the right, and I've gone for cost cap for this week. Just as to your point, Leaps has said, try and build a bit of budget to get into those premium lineups with less crap drivers. So yeah, budget's the priority for me this week. I know I'll get a red arrow, but I just hope it's more damage limitation than a huge rank fall.
We'll see what happens here. All right, Rob, I'll let you prep the shoey because we've got to do or we can do the contest first, whatever.
I will quickly throw up my team for anyone wondering what it was. I'll get the beer ready.
Rob, you did pick a 2X driver, right?
Yes, I did. Sorry, that wasn't confirmed in the screenshot. But
no, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have a big problem.
Hang on, I'll bring my actual team across here. I had that screenshot ready to go. In my second team, I actually went Max Verstappen. So
there you go. Hedge your bets.
Hedge my bets. Anyway, Adam, do you want to cover off some questions in the chat, and I'll get this.
I sure do.
Beer ready to go. Oh, it doesn't smell great for 10 to 10 in the morning.
What a champ. I'm going to start at a random point in the timestamp because we only have a few minutes left. Is RB or Haas better? I hope you're talking about individual drivers and not constructors. I would say Tsunoda, 2 Haas, Ricardo, in that order if you're talking about tier C drivers. If you were feeling crazy and you wanted the constructor, I would say Haas versus RB because Haas has the better chance of getting into the points this week. Chriswin wants to know McLaren and Red Bull with Norris, Tsunoda, Hulk, Mag, Sarge. Is that good? Yeah, that's perfectly good. Basically, you're hedging your bets. And this is a very similar team to what I had last week. McLaren and Red Bull, so you're getting a piece of that Verstappen grid penalty. You're putting your faith in Sergio Perez, but then you also have a guaranteed podium finisher in Norris.
All right. The boot is ready with the beer. Contest question, right? We probably want the contest winner.
Sure, yeah. Feel free to get the wheel ready. I'll keep going on the chat.
The wheel is ready. Yes, feel
Freddie,
free.
you can't bring yourself to trust Checo. I get it. Now, history has shown us these last 2 years at the very moment where his back is against the wall, where it has to be this race, he's come through. Interestingly, after a terrible qualifying session at Hungary, he did pull it together for a good race. And is that enough momentum with a good race today to keep his seat? We'll have to hope so. Pedro says, Lando, Hamilton, Mercedes, McLaren, perfectly fine. William got to Max and Red Bull in 2 trades and carrying a third to the summer break. Well, that's a good situation for you. Absolutely. That means you can come out of it for McLaren and Mercedes without much pain. Jeremy wants to know Hulk and Gasly versus Tsunoda or Bottas. I would say the latter just because of the power of Tsunoda. Hulkenberg could end up really anywhere between the top or the bottom of the meat grinder. Tsunoda's going to start at the back of the grid, probably avoid any issues in turn 1, most opportunity for overtakes. Evan's rocking a Mercedes triple up. Let's go, Evan. I hope you have so many points this week because that would make my heart happy. Not my fantasy team, but my heart would be happy. Rob, fire up that wheel. Let's do it.
Yes,
What's it going to be? It's Storm Shadow.
Nice. Congratulations.
Fantastic. Congratulations. You are our last 5th Gear Garms winner before the summer break. So we'll be in touch to get you your 5th Gear Garms gift card. And they just came out this weekend with kids merch. So looking forward to be matching my boys with some fun shirts in the second half of the year.
All right. I'll do the boot. And yeah, cheers. Hopefully a good result for Oscar this weekend.
Go get him, Rob.
Okay. Feel free to just watch or do whatever. I don't know what you do when I'm doing this.
It's the second shoe in a row that you've done just flawlessly.
Oh, there's a bit of spillage. I think the mic maybe covered it off.
Black shirt. Good call, Rob.
Yeah.
Very well done.
Oh, that was dreadful. But
you might have tasted the last shoey.
There was something in there that wasn't beer, but anyway.
For anyone who hasn't been keeping track in the chat, Terry said that Alonso's mechanics have teamed up with Stroll's mechanics to get his car ready. So if you have Stroll in your lineup, maybe you take him out because that's not a good look. Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of some of the latest questions. Ewan's in the chat coming to us live from Paris for the Olympics, where he'll be supporting some of the coverage for the Olympics. So best of luck, Ewan, and enjoy with that. That's going to be so exciting. All right. Ewan has posted his team, which is Red Bull, McLaren, Verstappen, Tsunoda, Hulk, Zoe, Sargent. Same for me, Ewan. I'm hoping that works.
I think I'm one of very few creators running no Red Bull, but I'm sleeping easy knowing I don't have to stress about -10s.
I'm probably gonna have some indigestion for the first half of the race tomorrow, and then assuming Perez gets out of Q1, that would be good for me too. A lot of people, Rob, are asking in the chat that if Bottas reaches a podium this year, will you rock a blonde mullet?
I know Luke's talking absolute trash, and that probably, I don't know how that will go down at work, so we'd have to wait and see. I'd probably be out of a job, but I'd probably be earning some brownie points from you guys if I did that, so we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, that's it. What a show, Adam. That was a fun one. Bit stressful, and I'm probably going to be hating myself at the end of the weekend, but I'm content with the decision. It was one I kind of made peace with before we even got on stream here.
It's been the wildest live stream of a year of wild streams. I'm so glad that we were able to take off so many questions. We had Terry on for longer than ever. So another great show to end the first half. All right, so that'll do it for our last live show. Big thank you to FanAmp for putting on the show, for Fifth Gear Garms, for sponsoring the show, and for all of you, because this has been the biggest half of our show that we've ever had, and we have all of you to thank for it. So good luck, enjoy the break, and we'll be back here for Zandvoort in just a month.